Thanks for joining us. I'm Brenda Mahoney.
And I'm James Milan.
We're bringing you special election coverage information regarding what voters are being asked to approve on June 14th, a Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion override addressing 3 different questions for school enrollment, rebuilding Arlington High School, as well as rebuilding the Minuteman High School.
In order to provide the best information for Arlington voters as they head to the polls on Tuesday the 14th, we invited proponents from a group called Build Arlington's Future, who support passage of all 3 debt exclusion questions, in for interviews in our studio, fully fleshing out their own perspectives and the questions and their implications for Arlington and its future. There is also one organized opposition group, Yes Yes No, and as you can tell, they support the first 2 questions but are in opposition to the Minuteman project or question number 3. We invited a representative from that group into the studio as well and are happy to present you with the following interviews. We begin with Brenda talking to Jane Morgan around question number 1.
I'm Brenda Mahoney, joined by Jane Morgan, part of Build Arlington's Future, proponent of the debt exclusion, Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion override questions. And we're here specifically to talk about question 1. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm in favor of question number 1. First of all, because I'm a parent with young children, I'm choosing to live in Arlington. I'm choosing to send my children to school here. And we're in a situation right now in Arlington where we have more students than we have classrooms. And so the town and the school department leadership has come together to really evaluate what our options are. And we've come to a place where we have a comprehensive plan for the middle school, for our middle school and our elementary schools to put in front of the voters, to ask them, as you said, to do 2 things. We need to remodel the Gibbs so that we can bring it back online as a second middle school serving 6th graders, as well as we need to add classroom expansion at the Thompson School, which is our East Arlington Middle School that has been first hard hit by this enrollment surge that we've seen over the last 5 years.
Let's talk about the enrollment surge and not going too much into what had happened specifically with Thompson in the past, but people still are asking, well, this school was just built in 2013, but now that there is a new data and a more of a forecast approach as opposed to going by birth numbers. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yes, so back in 2011 and then through 2013, when Thompson was under construction, the state and the town came together to agree to this number of 380, right? Which has it determines the number of classrooms, the size of the course spaces, et cetera. And Thompson School now, as of today, is north of 430 students. So since it opened, it has brought on many, many additional students. And what we need to do at Thompson is give them additional classroom capacity so that we don't see blending of grades. So offering fewer sections of a grade because there isn't an available classroom to offer them.
Okay. And that is essentially what is at stake, I suppose, if this were not passed by voters. Either the town come up with the money somehow itself in cutting capital expenditures, or that the classrooms balloon. So what is roughly the classroom size at this point?
So are we talking about Thompson or just at Thompson?
Specifically.
So Thompson, right now, they have 2 classes in the 5th grade of 29 and 30 students. And next fall, the town is going to pay for 2 modular classrooms, which will help. But in order to really solve the problem in the most cost-effective way, modular classrooms are not cost-effective. They're not bondable. They're not capital expenses. They've actually become very expensive over the last few years. So in order to really solve the problem for those students at Thompson, we need to build additional permanent capacity.
And so now getting it back into Gibbs as well. There has been a school enrollment task force. There's been the full school committee looking at this, even building facilities within the town, buildings committee as well, looking at all the different various options. So let's just lay that out, that part has been kind of looked at and vetted. Can you tell me, though, why that the town is confident that we're making the right decision here as far as adding on to Thompson and utilizing Gibbs as opposed to Ottoson? That is not what the question is right now, but we just want to reassert how that conclusion kind of came about.
Yes, so I think the reason that that the town and the school department and the school committee have made the decision to renovate the Gibbs and to bring it back online as a middle school, because it's important to remember Gibbs used to be a middle school. It was closed. It was brought offline when enrollment dropped in the early 90s, and now enrollment has come back up again, and it was sensibly held in reserve to be brought back online at a time when we might need it, and that time has arrived. Why aren't we going to add on to the Ottoson? There are two reasons why we aren't going to, why the town and why the sort of leadership has decided that it is not in the best interest of our students. The first is that Ottoson is already a very large middle school. It's one of the largest middle schools in the Commonwealth now. Were we to put on additional classroom capacity at the Ottoson, we would become very quickly the largest middle school in the state of Massachusetts. This is not a distinction that the town wants. It is not something that is in the best interest of our students. It doesn't put them in the position to have the best educational outcomes. So why not Ottoson? Because we don't want to have the largest middle school in the state. And the second reason is that regardless of whether you put an addition onto Ottoson or you renovate the Gibbs School, it's a significant capital expense for the town and for the taxpayers to take on. By renovating the Gibbs, we have a saleable, flexible asset that we can use down the road should enrollment change, should enrollment at the elementary level grow even more, should enrollment decline. We have an asset that is in East Arlington, which is a place where we've seen enormous population growth. It would be renovated, it would be to code, and we could use it for something else. We could bring it online as a different kind of school in a different combination. It just provides maximum flexibility. If we put a large addition onto the Ottoson, we can't use it for anything else other than middle school space, or it becomes much more difficult to do so.
And we're talking, it's roughly been projected $25–30 million to renovate the Gibbs?
South of $25 million.
Okay. Yeah. Is it possible then that we could be renovating, could be paying as taxpayers the 20 to 30 year bond on this beyond what the school would actually be utilized as a school?
It's possible, but I think it's unlikely. We can project, if you look at your kindergartners, right, your incoming kindergarten cohorts are enormous coming in. And those kids are going to be in the school system, in middle school through 8th grade, right? So they've got 9 years ahead of them. There are large cohorts that continue to be born. So realistically, could we be in a position where we are paying the bonds and Gibbs is no longer, it has been resurplused again? Potentially. I mean, predictions are only so good, but I think it's safe to assume that we will have school students who need to use that space for many years to come.
And as you pointed out, resurplus, then that means putting it back on the market for lease, and it has been utilized, and obviously with long-term tenants in the past.
Yes.
Okay. Is there more to come beyond these schools in need? Because the McKibben report, and that's the forecast that we're now kind of relying on, that shows that a lot of in-migration as opposed to out-migration. And if they are out-migrating, say, elementary or middle schoolers, they're coming in with elementary and middle schoolers, no longer coming in dual income, no children as much because of the market and the housing prices here in Arlington. So are we done yet? I mean, it's shown, I believe, the McKibben report that all of the elementary schools are either at or near capacity. So even though we're talking specifically about question one and Gibbs and Thompson, I just want to give people a sense of what the overall enrollment is and you know where we are and if there could be.
I think it's very likely that we will need to do something at the Hardy. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in that part of town right now, but I think it's likely that something will need to be done for the Hardy at some point in the next few years. They're bringing in a kindergarten class north of 85 students. It's a lot of kids, so you know it's fair to assume potentially that we would need to do something for them.
Has redistricting been looked at?
So I'm not a member of the school committee,
Right.
so I can't speak to where they are at in terms of redistricting. But it seems I suspect that everything is being considered, and
As I stated, there has been the school enrollment task force specifically that then speaks with the school committee and advises them on what the school enrollment task force has found.
Yes.
And taking into all of this different data. Are you confident that we're looking at all of the data, the right data, and making sound decisions based on that?
I think so. Arlington is a town that really supports the neighborhood school model. This is something that has been very important to Arlington since long before I came here. It's part of what I love about Arlington Elementary Schools. The school enrollment task force has been very supportive of the neighborhood schools is a big part of what Arlington is about. So I think keeping that in mind, they have really they have looked at all of the options for the middle school, and being fiscally responsible is a huge part of this process, and that was a huge consideration of the school enrollment task force as they looked through and sifted through every option, from building a floating school on Spy Pond to repurposing the Gibbs, and a lot of these things were taken out of consideration for various compelling and important reasons. So yes, I don't see any scenario where we're not going to need to use the Gibbs School. I don't see any scenario where we're not going to need an addition on the Thompson School. The Thompson School is graduating 59 fifth graders this year, and they're bringing in over 85 kindergartners to take their place. When that happens, and it's happened for a couple of years at Thompson, when that happens year after year, you're going to run out of space pretty quickly. So we're not talking about building a pool or an atrium or anything like that. We're talking about building classrooms, and they're clearly needed.
When you have a moment to talk to neighbors or maybe people over in Thompson or wherever else, what is it that you say as to why to vote yes for adding on to the Gibbs and reopening the Gibbs and remodeling it and adding on to Thompson?
I talk about my own kids because I'm a parent. I have kids who are in the schools. I have kids who will be in the schools for many years. I talk about how that the Ottoson teachers are very adamant. They don't want Ottoson to be any bigger than it is today. That it's not in the best interest of our students to have a really big school. I talk about, for me personally, my daughter going to the Gibbs School is not going to be ultimately super convenient, right? She's not going to be bused. We live far enough away that we're going to have to get her there, and yet she won't be bused there. But for me, it makes me feel so much more comfortable, the idea of sending her to a 500-seat school than to a 1,500-seat school or 1,400-seat school. So, why do I talk? What do I tell people about the Thompson? It's not my kids. My kids are at Stratton. My kids will never, likely see the inside of a Thompson classroom, but these are all our kids, and this is what we need to do. These are students who do not have classroom space if we don't choose to do this. Or we could continue to put up temporary modulars at great expense, and there's evidence to show that these students are coming. They're coming to Thompson, and they need classrooms.
Because there are some people that say, well, I'm okay with that alternative, bigger class size and modulars, and I don't really trust the town data and so forth because of, past preconceptions or actual things that have
Sure.
happened. And what do you think that has a chance?
You know,
At the ballot.
I think that Arlington is a generous town. I think that voters support public schools. I think they support reasonable class sizes. We're not talking about class sizes of 15 here. We're saying, you know, 30 kids in a class is too many right now for us. It's too many for Arlington. It's too many for what we think is important. So, you know, I don't. I think that people will support this because it's what has to happen, and the students, they're coming, and we need a place to put them.
Thank you very much. Jane Morgan, Build Arlington's Future. I'm Brenda Mahoney. Vote June 14th. Have your opinion heard at the ballot. Hello and welcome. I'm Brenda Mahoney, joined by Kirsi Allison-Ampe, here as part of Build Arlington's Future to talk about Build Arlington's Future is a proponent group made up of elected officials and volunteers in favor of the 3 ballot questions for Proposition 2.5 override debt exclusion vote on June 14th. And Kirsi also sits on the board, the school committee. Yes. So we're here to specifically talk about question number 2, which is approving for a debt exclusion beyond Proposition 2.5 for bonds for a feasibility study for the high school. Yes. So this is essentially asking for a study to see what can be done about the high school that's been identified. Go ahead and tell me how it's been identified and put on warning status that there is a need for a high school here, a new high school here in Arlington.
Great, thanks for having me. So a feasibility study is part of the MSBA's process. The MSBA is the Massachusetts School Building Association or Authority. And they are the ones who fund the building of schools and handle the state money which is provided. A feasibility study is done to look at, is one of the first parts of the building process. After you've been accepted into the program, you go through some eligibility steps and then you move on. And the parts of the feasibility study are to evaluate the educational program of the high school, what you're doing now, what you need to do in the future. You evaluate the building, what are its needs now in terms of reconstruction, what are its needs going to be in the future. And then you proceed from there to do some different what's the word? You come up with 3 or 4 different alternatives. You look at a complete rebuild, you look at a renovation, you look at things in between. Those are put out to a cost estimator who generates how much it would cost for these different alternatives and also what the benefits of each might be. And then a decision is made which of those alternatives is best for the town and which is felt to be best by MSBA. And then that one proceeds on to have schematic design done. The schematic design is a much deeper level of design, and that is then costed out, and then that becomes what we're talking about doing with MSBA in terms of the rebuild. And then that goes on for construction.
Right. So it hasn't been decided yet then as to which route to take. This is simply an
No.
open-ended feasibility study that addresses, let's take a look at Arlington High School and see what plan we can come up with, what different plans would cost and so
Right.
forth. I also want to back up though just a little bit as to people who, because there's been so much else going on in town with school enrollment, the high school hasn't been spoken about or talked about as much because it hasn't gone through any real process yet. So tell me about the high school and why it's been identified both by Arlington and even by the New England Board of Schools and Colleges, I believe, as needing a new facility.
Yes. I think the board that you're talking about is the New England Association of Schools and Colleges.
Thank you.
It is an accreditation agency. Accreditation is a voluntary procedure which almost all schools go through to show that they're maintaining high standards, both in terms of the education that they're providing and also that their facilities are up to the standard which is needed. Arlington went through their accreditation process last in 2013. It's every 10 years. At that time, we did well except for facilities. We were put on warning, which is not good, because of the shape our facilities were in. The NEASC was especially concerned about the way the substandard classrooms, because of size and because of visual obstruction, the poor science classrooms, which are small and ancient, and they put us on warning because of these things. If we have not addressed these by the time 2023 rolls around, we have a good chance that we would not pass the next set of accreditation.
So what's at stake here if voters do not approve Proposition 2.5 debt exclusion for this feasibility study?
Okay, first, I think that's unlikely to happen. I think talking to both parents, talking to senior citizens, many of whom went through the schools, I think there's a good sense that it's time. We need to rebuild the high school. But if by chance, for some reason, the question was to fail, I think what we would have to do is go back and do some focus groups, surveys, try and understand why it failed. My guess would be that there had been some confusion about Arlington's question and the Minuteman question, and we would want to tease that out and then address it, and then we would most likely go back again. If we were not able to pass a feasibility study ever, it would mean that we would not be able to rebuild the high school completely. We would have to go into a complete repair process, which would also be very, very expensive, and would likely not have MSBA support.
And could possibly still put you at risk for the NEASC accreditation?
Yes, because we would not, as part of a repair process, we would not be able to reconfigure the classrooms. We wouldn't be able to address the needs which are seen in 21st century learning, which are different from, I mean, our high school buildings were built in 1914, in 1938, in 1960, in 1981. There's never been a top-down reconstruction or renovation. And things have changed even since '81. There's been big changes in how education happens and how our students are felt to learn best.
Tell me how, once people vote for this, that this is the beginning of a longer process, that MSBA was invited Arlington to go to the eligibility period now for the high school, that this is part of a longer process, that this is just the beginning. If we approve this, if we buy into this, then you're going to buy into the rest of it, presumably.
Yes, we certainly hope so, because we feel strongly that it's time that the high school is rebuilt. So the process, as I said, MSBA, we follow MSBA's process because we would appreciate their tens of millions of dollars to help us pay for it. And it's a very scripted process. You have to go all through these steps. The steps include the eligibility period, which is what we're in now, the feasibility module, which starts soon, the schematic design module, which kind of overlaps the feasibility module, which is when we produce schematic designs, which will eventually be fleshed out into the new high school. And then there's other modules past that, which include picking an owner, project manager, and designer, picking doing the funding, which would be the debt exclusion to pay for the high school, and then the construction phase, which will, in our case, be a long process. Most likely, if we hit all our milestones with a reasonable pace, but not an accelerated pace, we would hope to be seeing the doors of a new high school open in 2021.
Is this the only part of the project, the feasibility study, that would be 100% paid for by town? My understanding is that if we go through the whole process and are accepted to rebuild the high school entirely, this part is also partially reimbursable. Up to what percent?
That depends. The reason I can't give you an exact number is because MSBA has guidelines on what it will and will not reimburse. For example, there are many town offices that are in the high school currently. If we keep those there, that part will not be reimbursable. And they also have a maximum cost per square foot to which they'll reimburse. If we have to pay more because that's what the market is bearing, we won't be reimbursed for that extra part. We're hoping somewhere between 30 and in the 40s. And we saw with the Thompson, we maximized the amount of the reimbursable amount for the Thompson school, and we would expect to do that with the high school.
The high school is looking at being redone for facilities. However, the feasibility study will also look at academics and so forth. What about for space? With the enrollment issue actually being addressed in question number 1 for elementary and middle schoolers, and the McKibben report for the forecasts, is there actually going to be more space needed at the high school for these growing enrollments that are coming up?
There may well be. We anticipate, when you look at the McKibben report, if you look 5 years out, we're going to have an additional 230 students at the high school. If you look 10 years out, it's almost 400. And those kids have to have seats in classrooms. Where it gets a little confusing is, first, there are the town offices and things, so maybe we boot them out and that becomes space so the actual high school doesn't increase in size. And also there are constraints put on by the MSBA for some things that you can have. Like, you can't pay for 2 gyms. So if we want to have 2 gyms, either we're going to have to pay for one of them ourselves, or we're going to need to repurpose something. So most likely there will be more classroom space, but exactly how much is difficult to say at this point.
And then the MSBA has their own set of rules that they look at their own data and forecast for projections, as they did in Thompson, correct? And that, therefore, if we're relying on their numbers, is it possible? I know this is getting down the line, but this is a question that, this is the beginning of a long process here. Could we have the same situation that happened with Thompson if the MSBA does not equal the same projected numbers that we have, and then therefore we aren't able to get that reimbursed amount for the additional space?
That's a really interesting question. Part of the problem is that we're having to predict quite far in the future, and it's very difficult to say exactly how many students. I think when you look back at I was talking to Jane Morgan today, and she was talking about how she had looked back at the Thompson numbers, and really the birth numbers did not show the kind of numbers that we're seeing in the school at this point. We will do, so yes, the MSBA comes in with their own set of numbers. We now have a new tool in our toolbox, which is the forecast model, not just a projection model. We're hoping that will help support our argument for a larger school as we go forward. How much, I'm not sure what year we plan to build for. Do we plan to build for enrollment 5 years out or 10 years out? But we'll certainly be having these discussions and be pushing back at the MSBA as much as possible. And I think they're aware of the things with the Thompson. So I think that we do have some ability to talk to them and get them to understand that we really do, even their numbers may be different. We have good reason to be concerned.
Anything else that you want to add that people may not realize about the high school feasibility question number 2 for voters on June 14th?
I really hope that people will vote for it. It is, if you, as the campaign goes forward, I'm sure there's going to be opportunities to come in and have tours, and we've already done this for officials. It is actually amazing seeing the classrooms which have columns. I mean, there could be a column right in front of you and you can't see the teacher because your seat's behind the column.
And there were tours a few years ago, but that would be great if people opened it back up for the next steps in the process, as there could be, as Mr. Dunn alluded to, that there could be coming back for another override in 18 months to 2 years for the actual project cost of the high school, correct?
Yes, that will be a necessary part of this, because this just funds the feasibility study, and then we'll have to actually pay for the high school.
On behalf of Kirsi Allison-Ampe and the Build Arlington's Future, addressing question number 2, specifically the high school feasibility study, I'm Brenda Mahoney. Thanks for joining us.
Hello and welcome. I'm James Milan. In just a couple of weeks' time, on Tuesday, June 14th, Arlingtonians are going to go to the polls in a special town election around 3 separate debt exclusion questions. That's asking Arlingtonians to add to the existing tax burden outside of Proposition 2.5 in order to fund several different projects, all related to the growing enrollment in our schools, or all related to our school system. We are here today with various members of Build Arlington's Future, and they are going to be both helping us work our way through the questions and the implications, and providing their own perspective on what the answers to those questions should be. Joining me in the studio right now is Dan Dunn, representing Build Arlington's Future, but of course Dan is also a sitting selectman in town. Dan, thanks so much for coming in.
Thank you for having me.
And talking to us today. So we are here to talk about question 3 on the ballot, which has to do with the Minuteman rebuild or renovation, depending on what that is. So question 3 asked Arlington voters to agree to pay our town's share of the bond that would be required for that project. Through the work that we all know you have done personally over these last several years, nobody knows more about all the ins and outs of this than you do. So please briefly explain, why should Arlingtonians, vote yes on question 3, which involves taking on a significant added tax burden, estimated to be $32, $33, $34 million perhaps.
32 million, and actually even hopefully less, depending upon how much out-of-district students pay. But 32 is the number that we put forward on the ballot. So, or not on the ballot, but as a part of our motion to put it forward. Why should we do this building project? Minuteman, the building is more than 40 years old. It's falling apart. It is the school is under warning from the accreditation board simply because of the physical plant. The educational programs are excellent, but the physical building is failing. And so if we don't do something about the building, the school will lose its accreditation. And I guess there's a second question which some people ask, which is why are we doing vocational education in general? And that one is definitely a bigger question. And the short answer is because it's state law. But actually, that isn't why I think we should be doing it. I think we should be doing vocational education because it is the right thing for a set of people. Some students love Arlington High School, and some students, Arlington High School isn't the right fit for them. And whether it's because they learn by doing, or whether it's because they want a more hands-on education, or whether it's simply because they want to enter the workforce earlier, vocational education is something that's been an option in Arlington for these 40-plus years. And between 115 and 175 students every year go to Minuteman from Arlington to learn a trade or a technical education.
Well, on that point, in fact, critics of this project, or at least as it's currently construed, have pointed out that there is already a significantly higher cost per pupil for sending the Arlington students that we do to Minuteman than within the Arlington public school system, and that is likely to go up quite dramatically as well in the wake of if this question is passed. So what do you say to those critics?
I do. It's vocational education is more expensive than traditional education. There's simply no way around it. It is true. Some of the labs and some of the space requirements and some of the mechanical needs mean that it is going to be more expensive. It's also worth pointing out that Minuteman does things like more than half the students who go to Minuteman are on a special education IEP, and those special education plans end up being more expensive. I think that sometimes some of the opponents or people who are concerned about vocational education end up comparing some apples to oranges. So they say, Minuteman costs $25,000 or $27,000 per student to educate, and that capital cost is going to put another $10,000 on top of it. And it's true but at the same time, no one ever compares. Like, when you look at the cost per capita and all the state numbers, the capital is always excluded, and it's simply because the capital is always framed differently. So I think that the short answer is that yes, vocational education is more expensive, but it is still the right education for the exact same reason that we provide special education for students when it's more expensive, or if you have particular needs that are more expensive, we provide them. We're here to educate the kids, not to find the cheapest education and deliver it to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Arlington residents may well be familiar with the fact that there are 16 schools within, or have been 16 schools over the course of history. I'm sorry, towns
yep.
within the Minuteman district, 16 towns. And that a vote to approve was at town meeting, or whatever the local government structure is in all those towns, was approved by all the towns except for Belmont. Belmont's town meeting turned this down. What are the implications of that for Arlington and for this vote?
Yeah, so if Belmont's vote ends up being the last word from Belmont, it does mean that this particular building project is dead. But I don't think that that's true. It's not the last word. There's still a lot of, there's still a few innings to be played, I'd say, in this game. And I say that because it's a fun analogy, but it, of course, actually isn't a game. The state the Mass School Building Authority has given an extension to Minuteman to find funding for the school through the end of November. And if you look at the course of how Arlington came around to saying yes in this building, a lot of people were skeptical about it in the beginning, including people from the Finance Committee, the chair of the Finance Committee, Al Tosti, other members of the Finance Committee, including John Deist. And the things that brought them around were the more that they learned about what the alternatives were to rebuilding at Minuteman. And the more you learn about it and the more you see what the options are, the more you realize that the one that we're looking at really is the best one. And so I'm hopeful by putting a little bit more time on the clock that we're going to spend more time with Belmont. We're going to get Belmont to yes as well. Because I think that once they realize how expensive the renovation option is and how little you get for it, that they're going to reach the same conclusion that Arlington, both the Arlington Minuteman Task Force did, the Board of Selectmen did, the Finance Committee did, Town Meeting did, and hopefully on June 14th, the voters will.
Okay. In doing our research in preparation for these interviews, we've heard different opinions on a very fundamental question, and that is whether our own town meeting's vote to approve of the Minuteman project is contingent on voters voting yes on question 3 on June 14th, whether it is contingent on that or not. So can you tell us, are we already on the hook for whatever Arlington's share is by our town meeting vote, or not?
We are not on the hook. And the reason we're not on the hook is that when the bonds are actually issued, when you get down into the nitty gritty of who actually signs the bonds and sells them to the people who buy the bonds, they rely on, there's a title which is bond counsel. Bond counsel has said if Arlington votes no on June 14th, these bonds will not be issued. And on this type of thing, his word is law. So no, we are not on the hook. June 14th is the day that will decide.
Okay, so a no vote, just to be perfectly clear, a no vote from Arlington voters on the 14th would cancel any obligation that we
It would cancel the obligation, and it would effectively kill the project. If Arlington is the largest part of Minuteman. It is we're sending a little bit more than a third of the in-district students. We're the biggest player. We're really the heart of that organization, and if we say no, then it's not going to happen.
Okay. Dan, as previously noted, for much of its history, the Minuteman District has been composed of 16 towns, but recent votes have reduced that just to 10 towns now operating within the Minuteman District. How are we going to get to those figures cited by Build Arlington's Future and other proponents of the Minuteman project? How are we going to get to those enrollment figures now that we're dealing with even fewer towns, and there's no sense that Watertown, Waltham, et cetera, are necessarily going to be signing on?
Minuteman gets its students from two sources. Basically, we call them in-district students and out-of-district students. And the 16 towns of Minuteman send 350, 400 450, depending upon 500, depending upon the years. It has ranged over the years. It's definitely lower than it has been. Those are the in-district students. The out-of-district students come from a variety of towns. There's what they call the big three, which are Watertown, Waltham, and Medford. And then the list goes on. There's there's a long tail of how you fill them out. And so when one of the things, taking a step back, one of the things that Arlington was very frustrated with Minuteman over the last many years is that we had 1/16 of the vote, even though we were sending 1/3 of the students. And the out-of-district students weren't paying their fair share within the school. And so that's actually why, if you look at votes of town meeting as recently as 3 years ago, we were actually opposed to the building progress as it was until we got a new regional agreement. And in that regional agreement, Arlington now has closer to a quarter of the vote. It's a weighted vote at the school committee. The out-of-district students are now required by the state to pay a capital cost for an approved building. And so we've really resolved a bunch of the problems that existed in the Minuteman district. And part of the price of doing that resolution was that some of the smaller towns were looking at the bills they were going to have to pay, and they chose to leave the district. A bunch of those smaller towns are going to keep sending their kids back as out-of-district students. And so I think some people get concerned about what fraction of the students in Minuteman are going to be in district or out of district. But what really matters at the end is, are the seats full? Because if the seats are full, then the bills will be paid. And when you look at the long range the enrollment, Minuteman has always had more than 700 students. And this building we're talking about building is 628. It's a downsized school from what exists right now. And so I'm really not worried about the fact that, no one can see into the future. But so 30 years from now, are we going to have 700 students? I think so. But no one can actually say for sure that that's going to be true, or it'll be any less.
But given the fact that, as you've just said, that we will continue to be dependent, or Minuteman will continue to be dependent on out-of-district students in addition to in-district students, and now the cost per student for out-of-district students is going to go up considerably for those towns if they're taking on capital costs. Will that not have an effect on the decision-making in those towns?
I think it definitely will. But in the end, all of those towns are required by state law to provide a vocational education. And if that student says, I want a program, and the only available program is at Minuteman, they're going to go to Minuteman, and that school is still going to, that town is going to have to pay, even if it is more than it was used to being paid in the past.
Well, thanks very much for coming in and sharing your perspective with us, and obviously providing a lot of useful information for the voters.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Really appreciate it. For Dan Dunn and Build Arlington's Future, this is James Milan. Thanks for joining us. We've had a chance to speak to several members of the group Build Arlington's Future, who are all proponents of the debt exclusion questions, or proponents of saying yes. Not everybody is in favor of all of those questions. In fact, there's another group, Yes Yes No, who by the nature of that title, you can tell, are supportive of the first two questions, but not of question 3 related to the Minuteman project. We are lucky to have in our studio Charlie Foskett, eminent member of our finance committee for many long years now, who is one of the primary members of the group Yes Yes No, to provide their perspective on this question facing Arlington voters on June 14th. Charlie, thanks very much.
James, nice to be here. Thank you.
For coming in to talk to us about this. So let's just get right to it. Obviously, Yes Yes No is a group not in favor of a yes vote on the 14th to the Minuteman project. Why?
James, before I answer that question, let me first mention that I'm representing myself and Yes Yes No, and not the Finance Committee. It's a Finance Committee actually voted 10-8 to support all 3 items.
Thanks for that clarification.
So the issue is really one of cost, and also good governance at Minuteman. If you look at the capital cost that this project is going to entail, and the benefits, the number of students that it benefits, we're really dealing with something that's completely out of proportion. You probably know that Minuteman is the most expensive vocational educational school in the state. And the educational cost in 2014 per student was $26,000 operating cost. As a comparison, Arlington is $13,000, and even Shawsheen Technical College, $17,000. So we could be $9,000 or $10,000 lower in our cost of educating these students if we had our students going to Shawsheen, for example. So getting back to the cost of this project to Arlington is going to be $10,000 of capital expense per student. We had 120 students last year, and the minimum cost is going to be $1.2 million. So that's roughly 120 students this year. So that's roughly $10,000 per student.
And you mean 1.2 million per year?
Per year, capital cost. Okay,
That's
to
how
service the capital, to service the debt. And
Excuse me, I just want to clarify, and that's on the basis of the $32 or $33 million obligation that has been cited.
yes. Under the best of circumstances, Arlington's share is going to be about 35% of that $33 million. And a basic problem is that the enrollment at Minuteman has been declining. You know that 6 towns are leaving the district. So this year, on October 1st of 2015, there were 390 students from the member towns at Minuteman. After the 10 towns leave, that number drops to 335. So the fewer towns besides Arlington that are in there, the higher the proportion of the cost that we have to bear. And under certain circumstances that were presented by the Minuteman School District Management, that cost could rise as high as $1.7 million or maybe even $2 million a year. So it's about cost and it's about fairness. It's not fair to the citizens of Arlington. It's not fair to the students who go to Arlington schools to have these resources drawn away for essentially a Cadillac building. And for that reason, the Yes Yes No committee is opposing this article.
Okay, so just to follow up on a couple of things you said, you just mentioned a Cadillac building. Does that mean that Yes Yes No, or at least, I'll just ask for your opinion about this, that you would be more inclined to support a different project, a rebuild of some sort, but not going for all of the bells and whistles that you referred to as a Cadillac building? Or
let me just say that first of all, we have a new regional agreement now, and Arlington has a bigger voice in the community. In past years, there were 16 towns. We had 1 vote. It's now weighted so that we and a couple of other larger towns will have more influence on outcomes. I think the alternative costs that they presented have been have fluff in it. Okay, and it's argued by the proponents that it's going to cost us $100 million if we don't go with the proposal with the
existing
MSBA
project.
Yeah, the existing project, and I've seen numbers from Minuteman a couple of years ago that were in the $50 to $60 million range. This is a building that has lots of space, and there's no reason why it can't be renovated and provided with good programmatic changes. I mean, the Arlington Advocate commentary by Selectman Dunn, he started out and says that the roof leaks. So therefore, the implication is the roof leaks, we have to tear the building down. Who has a house where the roof leaks that you don't replace the roof, not tear the building down? And, you know, we have a history in Arlington of sound renovations and good programmatic changes. For example, we did the Hardy School, we did the Bishop School, and we did there's a third school that we completely renovated, okay? And we have 2 of the three fire stations, historic buildings. We've rebuilt, modernized, changed to modern code, new programs, handicapped accessible. And we're doing the same thing with the police station. So the idea of doing a successful, cost-effective renovation that can be good, programmed well for the students at Minuteman in the 21st century is certainly not an impossibility. In fact, it's very practical.
So again, I just want to make sure I have this right, that the primary objection that Yes Yes No has to the Minuteman project is the project itself as currently configured, not the need for renovations and changes.
Absolutely.
Okay, so there is support for that, but just not.
This is a school that was built for 1,100 kids, right? So there's and they now have 600, 700 there, and they're going to probably have less going forward, okay? There's plenty of space to renovate that building over time and put new, modern program changes in there, without having a complete disaster.
Mm-hmm. You've mentioned a couple of times that it's a question of cost. And there's a couple of things that I think the proponents have to say in response to that. One of which is that vocational education itself is per se more expensive than regular education, let's say. And nonetheless, there's a real need for it in terms of quality of life. And in addition to that, there's an obligation to provide such education for students. So given those two things, is it proper, do you think, to measure the worth or not of this project solely on the basis of dollars and cents?
I don't think I'm measuring the project solely on the basis of dollars and cents, but I'd say it's principally about cost, okay? And let me go back to my comment. This is the most expensive regional vocational school in the state. Shawshene Valley Voc Tech, which for many years was run by our former selectman, Charlie Lyons, has an operating cost of $17,000 a year. This year, per student. This year, Arlington's student cost at Minuteman is going to be $30,000. If you take $10,000 or more dollars on top of that, that means we're spending $40,000 a student. I'm not saying that vocational education isn't more expensive. I'm saying we don't have to have the most expensive school in the state. This is a question of management. It's a question of fiscal responsibility. We can give our students a good education for a lot less money.
And you've mentioned Shawshene a couple of times. Is that a viable option, do you think, in terms of sending Arlington students possibly there were this whole project to fall by the wayside?
Well, it's a complicated question, and I would say that it certainly would be possible under some circumstances, but I'm not recommending those circumstances.
Okay.
I'm using that as an example. And it's a school that's only 15 minutes further away. It's treating a population of several towns, and it's providing good education, good technical vocational education for a lot less money.
Mm-hmm. And just last line of inquiry. You had mentioned that, or you alluded to the fact that we're all aware of, that the Minuteman agreement has recently been changed and that 6 towns have opted out. Yes. Moving forward, and that leaves the 10 remaining towns, potentially Waltham, Watertown, Medford, perhaps others might be enticed to join there. Kind of tracing that out, Selectman Dunn and other proponents have kind of mentioned figures in terms of meeting the new enrollment goals of the school, which they put at around between 600 and 700, from what I understand, as being entirely viable. What's your response to those prognostications?
Well, I think it's purely hypothetical as to whether Watertown or Waltham or Medford would join the school district. There are a lot of barriers there. I don't know if you've seen the recent article in Boston Magazine where the superintendent of Medford, I think it was, basically said, no way, no how, okay? And so, I mean, it's possible to get those schools to come in, but it's also possible to build another school in Arlington, and I can come up with all sorts of other alternatives. It's a pure hypothetical. I think we have to deal with the member towns that we have and the hope that we'll be bringing in some out-of-district students. After the 6 towns leave, there are 10 towns remaining. The 9 towns, besides Arlington, have had a 22% decline in their enrollment since 2005. Arlington's had a 13% decline in enrollment since 2005. So the trend is the enrollment's going down. It's not, if we're going to meet the target that the Minuteman management has stated for member towns enrollment when this new project is supposed to be complete, we're going to have a 36, 37% increase in member town attendance. And there's no history that shows that that's even possible. In addition, they're looking for 170 out-of-district students who pay tuition. So they will have to pay $17,000 in tuition, and I'll come back to that. But in addition, they're going to have to pay an $8,500 a year capital charge in principal, okay?
To help pay for
this project. Now, from my view, I'm not an economist, but when prices go up, purchases go down. Okay, so I think there'll be less of a tendency for Waltham or Medford or other schools to be sending children to the Minuteman when you increase the price by 30% or something like that. In addition, the state has recently made a change in the law that more or less pushes towns that have other options to not send freshmen to out-of-district schools. So the problem is this is not just a financial statement, it's also a social problem, because how many sophomores in high school do you know that want to leave their friends after their freshman year and go to another school? I think that's going to be a really small number. So the state has put up a barrier to prevent out-of-district migration that Minuteman's going to have to deal with, and that's going to depress the number of out-of-district students. So, I mean, not only is this cost high to begin with, but I think it's going to get higher for Arlington because enrollment is going to go down, and that's not going to favor Arlington's cost structure.
Okay, thank you for that. And before we wrap up, I just wanted to invite you, if there is something that you feel needs to be addressed and we have not yet done so, I invite you to comment on that.
Well, I would like to mention that we have a website, www.yesyesno.org, and I would encourage anybody who's interested in seeing a lot of the details behind this analysis to look at it. And I guess I would like to say that I think personally that we should wait until after the new regional agreement has had a chance to settle in, when we have an opportunity to have more influence over the direction and the management of the district, to determine exactly how to move forward, to find out what indeed is the population trend going to tell us, and then do we want to rebuild that school? Do we want to build a new, smaller school? I don't think we want to build a school for 650 students on the idea that if we build it, they will come, because that hasn't been demonstrated to be the case in the past.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for
You're very
coming
welcome,
in
James.
to talk with us today. We appreciate Charlie Foskett taking the time to come in and talk to us on behalf of Yes, Yes, No, and provide the fullest possible perspective, we hope, for you in dealing with question 3 and the other questions on the ballot on Tuesday, June 14th. So on behalf of Charlie Foskett and for Arlington Public News and Arlington Community Media, I'm James Milan. Thanks for joining us.
You just watched all of the interviews regarding the questions for the special election being held on Tuesday, June 14th. Polls will be open from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m.
We hope you found these interviews to be helpful and educational. If you would like more information, there are multiple sources. You can go to the town's website, and you can also go to buildarlingtonsfuture.org or yesyesno.org. And for all of the information and all of the segments in their entirety, you can find those at news.acmi.tv. Thanks for joining us.